What would you say if I told you about a guy who shows up late to work every day? When he gets there, he's belligerent, vulgar, incompetent. He goes out and he has a reputation for drinking to excess, being unruly, promiscuous. Some of you might say, introduce me to this guy. He sounds like he's a lot of fun at parties. Other people might say he lacks moral character, he lacks discipline, self-control. We may even go so far as to say he is abusing the gift of free will that he's been given. But what if we rewound time a little bit and looked a year earlier, into the year 1848, and found that this same individual, Phineas Gage, was one of the most widely respected, competent, upstanding members of his community? What exactly happens to take somebody who is the epitome of a good citizen and a competent worker and turns him into an absolute nightmare to be around? Well, working out on the railroad, Phineas Gage found himself the victim of a freak accident. And in an explosion, a pipe went up through his head, destroying portions of his prefrontal lobe that alters his behaviors from that day onward for the rest of his life. His company, although they felt horrible, supposedly, of the injuries that he had sustained whilst working for their organization, found that no matter how hard they tried to work with him, his behaviors made it impossible for him to be retained and had to let him go. So why bring up this story? And the reason is because the other day I released a little bit of information discussing free will. And I got a few messages in my inbox from people who were quite concerned because they believed that, how could you think that free will doesn't exist? And I found that curious because in the video I never once said that I didn't believe in free will. As a matter of fact, if you know me, you know that I'm not a big fan of buying into genetic determinism completely. I'm not someone who's deciding on that level, but I also believe it's fair that there are influences over human behavior that are beyond our control sometimes. And everything we think we know about behavior is not resolute. And it's not important to be right as much as it is to be effective. And therefore, it's not about having the right answer. Sometimes that's just not possible, given the limited information we have available. But more important, being willing to stay in the question is what expands our mind and allows us to lay the pathway, the road that we travel down in our own personal, intellectual, and therefore professional growth. Because if we don't accept information that's outside of our beliefs and our worldview, and if we say, this is what I believe, and nothing else can possibly be possible because I don't subscribe to it, we succumb to what's called confirmation bias. And a confirmation bias is the assassination of critical thinking. And what we also succumb to, especially in the world of fitness professionals, is what my friend Roy Sugarman likes to call an attribution error, where we see somebody doing something contrary to their stated goals, and we attribute their behavior to something intrinsic, like character, willpower, and of course it could be anything in their environment that's causing them to behave that way, but in our own lives, conversely, when something happens and causes us to act in a way contrary to what our ideals are, we would never attribute it to our internal state or character or morals. We always attribute it to something outside beyond our control. And that turns our interaction with our clients, rather than an empathetic exploration, it turns it into an indictment. And I think it's far more beneficial and yields far greater efficacy when we have an open, compassionate mind and we seek to understand rather than having our worldview being understood. So it's not a matter of right or wrong sometimes, because we as human beings just simply do not have enough information to be absolutely certain in most areas of our life. It's a matter of being effective. So when I post questions sometimes, it's not a matter of I believe this or you should. It's a matter of ask the question and see where intellectual rigor, curiosity, compassion, passion, and empathy lead.